Good afternoon and happy Hanukkah, everybody. It's great to see everyone on this joyous second day of Hanukkah. So, obviously, we have a weekly Torah portion this week, which is Miketz, but we're also going to focus on the holiday of Hanukkah. And whenever you have a holiday that coincides with a Torah portion, the obvious question is, there must be a connection between the Torah portion and the holiday that we're celebrating. And in this case, the Torah portion connection to Hanukkah is very, very evident and obvious in the opening of the Torah portion. So, what is the opening of the Torah portion of Miketz, which is found in the Blue Art Scroll Chumash on page 222? The opening of the Torah portion is the story of Pharaoh having two dreams. The first dream he has is that he's standing on the bank, on the shore of the Nile, and he sees 7 robust, fat, healthy cows emerge from the Nile. But then a second set of 7 cows come out after the healthy, robust, fat cows, and they are skinny, emaciated, thin, poorly looking cows. And the 2 sets of cows stand next to each other. And what happens? The 7 emaciated, ugly appearance cows swallowed up, devoured the fat, healthy, robust looking cows. And Vayikatz Paro wakes up from this dream. And what does he do? He goes back to sleep. And now he has a second dream. And what does he see in the second dream? He sees 7, again, healthy, strong, robust, full sheaves of grain. And then a second set of 7 sheaves of grain. But these are kdakot ushtufot kadim, which means they were thin and scorched looking grain. But what happens, like in the first dream, the thin, skinny sheaves of grain swallow up the healthy, strong, large, robust sheaves of grain. And once again, Paro wakes up and it's a dream. So there's obviously a theme here, something to do with food, cows, meat, grain, and the skinny ones are devouring the fat ones. And Paro wakes up and he cannot understand what the message of this dream is. And we all know what happens. At this point, the butler, who had forgotten about Joseph, suddenly remembers Joseph, because now he can make himself look good that he's going to be the one to save the day and help Paro, because it says Paro told over the dream to all his interpreters and nobody could interpret the dream. So he says, I was in prison, and he has to bring up that he was in prison, but he has to remind Paro because he has to help Paro. And he says there was a Jew there. There was a Jewish prisoner in the prison. And me and the baker each had dreams, and he successfully interpreted both dreams. And so he's an interpreter of dreams. So Paro says, okay, call him up. They summon him from the prison, actually says from the bar, from the pit. Prisons in those days were a pit. They give him a haircut. They change his clothing. You're not going to bring a prisoner who's dirty and unkempt in prisoner garb to a king. So they get him ready, and he comes before Paro. And we all know what happens. He tells Paro it's one dream with one message. And the dream is telling you that God is going to bring 7 years of plenty upon Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. And the famine will be so great that, like the skinny cows devouring the fat cows, and like the skinny sheaves of grain devouring the healthy-looking grains, it will be as though there never was years of plenty, because the starvation and the famine will be so grave. And why 2 dreams? It seems like it's an identical message, because God is showing you that it's going to happen quickly. This is not something that's going to happen in many years now. It's imminent, and therefore we need to spring into action. And what does Yosef recommend that Paro does? He says he has to start gathering the grain in the years of plenty and storing it for the years of famine to get through the years of famine. And that's exactly what Paro does. as we know. And Joseph goes on to become viceroy of Egypt. He says, "You're the smartest man I know. I'm going to make you second in command." Pharaoh says, "You will be the one overseeing this. You will be right underneath me. Nobody will be higher than you except me. And you will implement this program of saving food." And Yosef does that and saves the land and ultimately his family from famine and is reunited when they come to Egypt. That's the way the story ends. So going back to our original question, what does this have to do with Hanukkah? And the answer is that it has everything to do with Hanukkah. Because when you look at this story, you have to ask yourself a more fundamental question, which is, it says Paro woke up and he didn't understand the meaning of the dreams. So he summoned all of his advisors and all of his interpreters of dreams. Nobody could satisfactorily interpret a dream. Until the butler says, "I know a guy, a Jewish guy who can interpret dreams." And the Jew is pulled out of the pit, the prison, and brought to Pharaoh and interprets the dream. So the question is, this is not a very difficult dream to interpret. I mean, all of us are not interpreters of dreams. We're not professional dream interpreters. But if I tell you 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 robust sheaves of grain, 7 thin, and the thin cows and the thin grain are swallowing up the fat ones. I mean, it's clearly talking about food. It's clearly talking about plenty years followed by famine years. And it's clearly saying they're going to come in the numbers of 7. So why is that nobody could interpret the dream? And not only could nobody interpret the dream, but when Joseph does come to interpret the dream, Pharaoh is so impressed with his wisdom, with his genius, that he says, "You know what? I want no one else but you," which is very strange to take a prisoner and make him prime minister of the country. You know, imagine that today, that some guy who's in prison gets pulled out of jail and becomes prime minister of the United States of America. I mean, that's how far-fetched it is. And now and then he's a Jew. So what was it that was so remarkable, earth-shattering, that Paro was so impressed? And there's one other question here, and that is, Joseph was invited or summoned by the king to interpret the dream. He should have told Paro, "Listen, this is what it means. It's going to be 7 plentiful years and 7 famine years." And then Paro would call his cabinet together and say, "We have a looming danger, threat, disaster on our hands. What are we going to do?" And get the input of all of his advisors, what to do about the situation. But that's not what Joseph does. Joseph not only interprets the dream, but he goes on to give Paro advice, telling him what he should do. Now, perhaps that's a little overreaching. You know, you were summoned before the king. You're a lowly prisoner. All you asked to do is interpret the dream. Why are you starting to now tell the king what he should do about it? So Rabbi Soloveitchik explains that you have to understand the culture of Egypt. Egypt was a country that was blessed with one of the longest rivers. Different opinions of the Nile or the Amazon is the longest river, but everyone knows the Nile River is one of the longest rivers in the world. And therefore, they always had a constant supply of water. You know, when the Jewish people were going to Israel, Hashem said, Israel is not like Egypt, because in Israel, you have to turn to the heavens and ask for the rain to fall from the sky, to fall from God. So you have to be worthy of the rain, and which will be sent to you from above. But the Egyptians didn't have to look up. They just looked down to the Nile, and the Nile irrigated their fields constantly. And therefore, the idea that there could be 7 years of famine in Egypt was literally inconceivable to the Egyptians. Because what do you mean? We have a constant supply of water. Why in the world would there be famine? Famine means there's a drought. It means there's no water. But if we have a Nile River that never dries up, we have plenty of water. We don't have to rely on the rain. If you believe in God and the rain has to come from heaven, then, you know, God could withhold the rain. As it says in the Shema, God will, if you disobey God, God says, I will withhold the rain. And we know that, you know, there's a whole tractate in the Talmud, which is actually being studied right now in the Daf Yomi cycle, called Ta'anit, fasting. And in the olden days, it talks a lot about in this tractate how whenever there was a drought, they would take the bima of the synagogue into the square of the city and they would pray for rain. And even in Israel today, there are times when the water levels are very low and people go to the Kinneret and hold special services to pray for rain. But that's only if you believe in God. If you believe in nature and you worship nature the way the Egyptians do, then there could be no famine, because the natural system in Egypt provided through the Nile constant water. So how could there be a famine? So they came up with all these other interpretations, and Rashi actually quotes from the Midrash some of the interpretations they came up with, that there's going to be 7 wars that you're going to win, and then 7 wars you're going to lose, and you're going to have 7 children, you're going to bury 7 children. They came up with everything but the obvious, which is the food. Why? Because you couldn't understand naturally how there could be 7 years of famine that could obliterate the 7 years of plenty. So what happens? The butler remembers there was a Jewish prisoner, Joseph, and he's summoned from the prison, which our rabbis say was on Rosh Hashanah, actually. And only Joseph could interpret the dream. Why? Because Joseph thinks like a Jew. A Jew knows that even the natural world is dependent on Hashem. And therefore, you will never have trust and reliance on anything in the natural world, because the natural world is governed by Hashem. And therefore, only Joseph was able to come to this conclusion. Now, here's the connection to Hanukkah. What happens in the dreams of Pharaoh? The big, strong, robust stalks of grain and fat cows are devoured by the skinny, emaciated, thin cows and grain sheaves. What happens in the story of Hanukkah? Exactly the same thing. This morning in the Shemona Esrei, we said the Ala Nisim prayer, thanking God for the miracles of Hanukkah. And what did we say? That God delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, meaning the Syrian Greek armies into the hands of the Maccabees. God delivered the many, the large army, into the small, into the few. In other words, the natural order is survival of the fittest. Those who are strongest, those who are more powerful, those who are larger, consume and devour those who are weaker and smaller. But just like in the story of Pharaoh's dream, it's the weaker that conquer the stronger, that devour the bigger, the larger. That's the story of Hanukkah. The small Maccabees, outnumbered and out-armored by the Syrian powerful army, defeated the large army. Why? Because just like Israel in our modern day, from 1948 till today, in every single war, defeated its enemies, even though we were outnumbered, because God could perform miracles where the natural order is not what occurs. Something unnatural or supernatural happens. And the weak or the small, as we say in the Ala Nisim prayer, are able to conquer and overpower the mighty and the many. So this is the direct correlation between the story of Hanukkah and the story of Pharaoh, and they both point to the same message. The message that God was sending Pharaoh was that I am the ruler of the world, not you. You may think you're a god. You may act like a god. You may pretend to be a god. You may carry yourself and, tell your people to worship you like a god, but you're not God. There are certain things that are beyond your control, like famine and plenty. And that's the same message of Hanukkah, that a little bit of oil could dispel a great deal of darkness. The small Maccabean army can defeat the mighty, large, powerful Syrian Greek army. So there's actually a direct correlation between the opening of this week's Torah portion and the story of Hanukkah. But just to dig a little deeper into the story of Joseph and answer some of the questions we asked, why no one else was able to interpret the dream, and why Joseph not only interpreted the dream, but gave Pharaoh advice, even though he was not asked how to solve the problem. He was just asked to interpret the dream. Clearly, if Joseph went on to tell Pharaoh what to do, it must mean that in the dream, God was communicating this solution to the problem. Because, God doesn't give us a problem without a solution. Matter of fact, the Talmud says that God always precedes the solution before the problem. That God is magdim refuah l'makah. God brings the healing into the world before the illness. as you know, when people talk about looking for a cure for an illness, they don't say we're creating the cure. They say we're searching for the cure, implying that the cure already exists, because God would not introduce an illness or a problem that there was no cure already in existence. So when God shows Paro the dream of the crisis or the impending threat to his culture, to his agriculture, to his society, to his nation, he introduces the solution. How do you find the solution that you should store food during the years of plenty for the years of famine in the actual dream of Pharaoh? So there's one very little detail in the story that is very important. And that is what happens in Pharaoh's dream. 7 fat cows come out and stand along the Nile. And then 7 other cows come. And what do those other cows do? Does anyone want to tell me either what do the second set of cows do when they come out of the water? They come out of the Nile. So obviously they're going to eat up the fat cows, but there's one thing they do before they eat up the fat cows. Did you catch that in the verse? Verse 3, what does it say? The skinny, emaciated, thin cows come out. And there the verse says 6 words that are completely extra unless they have very specific meaning. The skinny cows, vatamodna eitzel haparot al svasiar. The skinny cows stood alongside the fat cows on the bank of the Nile. And then verse 4 says, the skinny cows ate up the fat cows. So every detail in the dream is meaningful. If it's just saying they're fat cows, good years, and then famine years, okay, the skinny cows should come out of the Nile and eat up the fat cows in the dream. Obviously, in dreams, cows can eat up other cows. It doesn't really make sense, but it's a dream. It's a metaphor. What is the detail? 6 verse words. And the skinny cows stood on the bank of the river alongside the fat cows. What is this image of the 2 sets of cows standing side by side? In other words, at one point in the dream, there are 14 cows standing on the bank of the river of the Nile. 7 fat ones, alongside them, 7 skinny ones. And furthermore, it doesn't even make sense in the interpretation, because either it's years of plenty or it's years of famine. You can't have the famine years and the plenty years side by side. You can't have both at the same time simultaneously. It's one or the other. So why in the dream does God show him that both sets of cows are standing alongside each other? And this is the key that unlocks the whole dream, and why Joseph offers an interpretation. Because it wasn't his interpretation. As Joseph said, whatever God shows me is what I will interpret. God is giving it to me. You see, the solution that Joseph presented to Pharaoh, which is to hoard food during the years of plenty and then live off that food during the years of famine, was actually given to Pharaoh, that solution in the dream, in that one frame, in that one image of 14 cows standing alongside each other. Why? Because what God was saying was, if during the years of plenty, you're already reserving and setting aside food for the years of famine, that means that during the years of plenty, you're already feeling and experiencing the pinch, the hunger of the years of famine, because you're already allocating food for the years of hunger. And during the years of hunger and famine, you're eating off the food that you store during the years of plenty. So that means during the years of hunger and famine, you're feeling the benefits of the years of plenty. And that's the idea that all the cows are side by side. That by doing what Joseph told Pharaoh to do, you will have not only 7 years of famine followed by 7 years of famine, but in a sense, even during the years of famine, you'll already be feeling the years of plenty. You'll be experiencing the 7 cows. And then during the years of famine, you'll be eating from the first 7 years, so you'll be experiencing the fat cows as well. And that's why Joseph was the one to interpret this dream with the solution. None of the other interpreters were able to come up with a way that all 14 cows could stand side by side. Because if you win 7 wars and lose 7 wars, they're not simultaneously. You're either winning or losing You're not doing both at the same time. Same thing with the other interpretations. You'll have 7 children, you'll bury 7 children, God forbid. So he saw that only Joseph was able to come up with this interpretation, and Joseph was the only one to see that God was actually giving the antidote to this situation to Pharaoh in the actual dream. Now, I'm going to just share with you quickly one other this is interesting connection to Hanukkah. Parshat Miketz, which is this Torah portion, always falls out on Hanukkah. And you may know this, the Baal Korah reads the weekly Torah portion, everyone in the synagogue listens. But after each Torah portion, there's little fine print, as they say, you got to read the fine print. At the end of each Torah portion, it tells us how many verses there are in that week's Torah portion. So, for example, in this week's Torah portion, there's 146 verses. That's the first thing it does. Second thing it does is it gives you a word to remember it, because letters have numerical value. So, for example, the word for this week's Torah portion is Yechizkiyahu. If you remember the word Yechizkiyahu, you could add up the numerical value of the letter. It's Yud Ches Zayin Kuf Yud Hey Vav, and it equals 146. Sometimes it gives you a second or a third siman, and here in this case it gives us 2 others, and it actually gives us simanim that are connected to the Torah portion, so you can remember it easier because you remember the connection to the Torah portion. But there's only one Torah portion in the entire Torah where after, and this is not from the Torah, this is from the printer, whoever printed this gave us the count of how many verses. It's only one Torah portion where it says not only how many verses there are in that Torah portion, but how many words there are. No other Torah portion says how many words there are. In our Torah portion, it says there are 146 verses, and there are 2,025 words in this week's Torah portion. Now, this is before computers, but they counted exactly how many words. 2,025. We're in 2021. So in 4 years from now, we'll be in 2025. That's how many words there are in this week's Torah portion. Why is it that we need to know how many words there are? And why only this Torah portion, which coincides with Hanukkah? Well, 25 is an obvious connection to Hanukkah because the miracle, the resting from the enemies occurred on the 25th day of Hanukkah. It's actually called Hanukkah, which can be divided into 2 words. Chanu, they rested. Chaf Hey, on the 25th day of Kislev. They won the war on the 24th. They rested on the 25th. So that's Chaf Hey. But what's 2,000? Well, how many candles do we light? Obviously, on Hanukkah, 8 candles. The word for candle in Hebrew is ner, a candle. The word ner is made up of 2 letters, nun and resh. Nun has the numerical value of 50. Resh has the numerical value in the Hebrew alphabet of 200, which means that ner equals 250. 8 times 250 is 2,000. That's the 2,000. And then, after the 2,000, we have 25 for the 25th day of Kislev. So there's the holiday of Hanukkah is alluded to in the precise amount of words in this Torah portion that always coincides with Hanukkah, which is Miketz, that it has 2,025 words. This Torah portion is a very, very, very dramatic Torah portion. Why? Because this is the Torah portion where after 22 years of separation and alienation, the brothers arrive before Joseph to buy food, not knowing that he's Joseph, knowing that he is thinking he's the viceroy of Egypt. And the famous verse of this week's Torah portion, Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And as a result of that, he was able to accuse them of being spies and tell them to prove they're not spies by bringing their baby brother Benjamin to Egypt. And then at the end of the Torah portion, which is a real cliffhanger, he plants his royal goblet into the backpack of Benjamin. And then when they leave town, he chases after them and accuses them of stealing the backpack and finds it accuses them of stealing the goblet, finds it in the backpack of Benjamin. And he says, everyone can go home except Benjamin. He has to stay as a slave. And in next week's Torah portion, Judah, who was the one who originally recommended selling Joseph into Egypt, stands up and says, you cannot take away this young boy from our father. He already lost his oldest son, Joseph. He's been weeping and grieving for his older son. And now if he loses the second son, he cannot survive. And therefore let the boy go home and I will stay in his place. And at this point, Joseph breaks down in next week's Torah portion and says, I am your brother, Joseph. Is my father still alive? Amazing climax to the story. But I want to show you another very powerful connection to Hanukkah in the message of Hanukkah. You see, what happened here? After 22 years, there's no food in Israel, Canaan. They come to Egypt because Egypt's the only place that has food. They come before the viceroy, and Joseph sees his brothers. And what does the verse say? Vayaker Yosef et achav. Joseph recognizes his brothers. Vehem lo hikru. They didn't recognize him. Now, what does that mean literally? Well, Joseph is wearing Egyptian garb. He's the viceroy of Egypt. He was also 17 when he was sold into slavery. Now, 22 years later, he is 39 years old. 17, you're a teenager. 39, you're a grown man. They didn't recognize him because he was the baby at the time. So literally, they didn't realize it was him, as opposed to he saw who they were right away. He saw 11 brothers. You see a team, you recognize who they are right away. Okay. But there's a much deeper message in that statement that correlates to Hanukkah beautifully. This is a statement that not that they didn't recognize his facial features, his body appearance, his bodily appearance. It's stating what the problem was all along in this relationship between Joseph and the brothers. You see, Joseph recognized them, but they never recognized him. They never appreciated who he was. You see, in the beginning of the story, Joseph had dreams. He's going to be a ruler. He's going to be a leader, like the sun and the moon and the stars are going to bow down to him, and the sheaves of grain are going to bow. And they all came true because the sheaves of grain were bowing to his sheep. They're coming to buy food in Egypt. But you see, Joseph had a vision that he's going to be on the world stage. He's not just going to be a Jew living in a shtetl, a Jew isolated from the world, doing his Jewish thing with the family of Jacob, disconnected from the rest of the world. He saw himself rising on the world stage, having a big impact outside of the Jewish family. And the brothers looked at him and said, what are you talking about? You're going to assimilate if you leave the Jewish family. If you think you're going to go out there and become a big ruler and be related, Jews have to remain apart. We have to say, remain separate. We cannot integrate. We cannot go out into the big world. The big world will swallow us up. The world will, devour our Jewish identity. And the whole message of Hanukkah is that to be a Jew is that you have to have a light that has to shine brightly, or lagim, a light unto the nations. That yes, there's darkness in the world. You have to illuminate the darkness of the world. We do have an obligation as Jews to light up the whole world. And at the same time, preserve our identity. The whole idea of oil is that oil never mixes with other liquids. Oil rises to the top. You put water and oil together, the oil rises to the top. It doesn't go down. It doesn't mix with the water. On the one hand, Jews are like oil, we remain apart. At the same time, we have to be a light unto the world, unto the darkness. And now Joseph proved that he can do both. Joseph remained righteous, even in Egypt. He maintained his faith, his belief in God and his connection to his ancestry and his past. But at the same time, he became a leader in the world. And he brought God into Egypt. As the verse says, I have placed God as a ruler over Egypt. Meaning to say, not just that God has placed me as a ruler, but I have placed God over Egypt. So the brothers never understood the true greatness of Joseph. They never understood the true character of Joseph. They didn't recognize him for who he really was. This was a new path for a Jew to go out and become a ruler over another nation outside of the Jewish faith, and to show that he could save humanity or an entire region from famine. And that's what the verse is saying, that the brothers didn't realize who Joseph was. They never recognized him. They never understood him. They never related to him properly. And that was the source of the entire rift in the family. And the message of Hanukkah is that you could be a Jew. The Hellenists wanted the Jews, the Greeks wanted the Jews to become Hellenists. They said, give up your Jewish faith, just become like us. We have philosophy, we have culture, we have art, we have all these things. What do you need your ancient faith? And the Maccabees said, no, we're gonna preserve our Jewish identity. We're going to preserve our faith and traditions, and that's the message of Joseph. Joseph says you could live in the world, and at the same time be a light unto the world. You could remain separate from the world, and it's the message of Hanukkah to be like the Maccabees, to stand up for your faith and not allow the nations to, like the Greeks wanted to do, to deny you your religious expression of freedom to keep Shabbos, to keep circumcision, to keep Rosh Chodesh, to study Torah, but at the same time to be a light unto the rest of the world. And that's the message of the story of Hanukkah. And that's what Joseph did. Joseph did not compromise one iota his faith. As a matter of fact, he's the only biblical figure who receives the title Tzaddik, Yosef HaTzaddik, that even in Mitzrayim, which was the lowest level of promiscuity and impurity, he still was able to retain and maintain his holiness and his connection to God, and at the same time be a light unto the nation of Egypt. And this goes to the heart of the matter, that they never recognized him. And imagine the brothers' regret when Joseph ultimately reveals his identity and says, I am Joseph, is my father still alive? And they realize that they misjudged him all along. They didn't understand his true greatness. They thought he would assimilate in Egypt. Far from it. He remained a proud, identified Jew, just like the Maccabees. He refused to become like the Hellenists, to lose his Jewish identity. But at the same time, he was part of the larger world and impacting the larger world. And this is, till today, there are some Jews who are afraid to venture into the world, thinking that the world will somehow corrupt them. But if you have confidence in who you are as a Jew and you have faith in the Torah, you know that no power in the world can corrupt you or the Torah, that the Torah is above, like the oil that floats to the top. The Torah is above and superior to any other ideology, any other religion or faith. And, unfortunately, when kids go off to college and they're not confident in their own Jewish background, they're not knowledgeable, then they could be easily swayed, God forbid, and veer off the path of Judaism. But when a child receives a proper Jewish upbringing and education, and the word Hanukkah is from the word chinuch, like rededication of the temple and education. When a child gets a proper Jewish upbringing and education, they have the inner confidence, strength, and resilience to ward off any pressures of anti-Semitism or assimilation or whatever it may be. And that is the story of Yosef, that Yosef was able to be in Egypt and at the same time maintain his holiness and his righteousness. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the holiday of Hanukkah. We are now in the second day of Hanukkah. Now, last night we lit 2 candles on the menorah. Why? Because we follow the opinion of Bet Hillel. So I'm going to show you something on a piece of paper here. How is the word Hanukkah spelled? 5 letters. Chet, Nun, Vav, Chaf, He. And that stands for Chet, 8, Nun, Nerot, candles, V'halacha, and the law, Kibes, like the house of Hillel. Why? Because there was a second opinion in the Talmud, which was the opinion of Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai said the last night, 2 nights ago, we should have lit 8 candles. Last night, we should have lit 7 candles. Tonight, we should be lighting 6, the night after 5. All the way down to 0 candles, or 1 candle on the last night. We follow the ruling of Bet Hillel. It says we start with 1, we go up. What's the difference? Bet Shammai says you light 8 on the first night, because that shows how many more days we have left to Hanukkah. Last night we had 7 days left. Tonight we have 6 days left. As opposed to Bet Hillel says, no, we mark how many days we are into Hanukkah, 1 day into Hanukkah, 2 days into Hanukkah. And we all know we follow the opinion of Bet Hillel. But the question is, why do we follow Bet Hillel? So the Talmud tells us the answer. And it's 4 very powerful words that we have to remember, not just on Hanukkah, but every day of the year. Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'in moridin. We ascend higher in holiness. I'm sorry, I had an incoming call. We ascend higher in holiness. We do not descend. According to Beit Shammai, we're descending. 8765431. According to Beit Hillel, we're going higher. And the message is every day we have to increase. We have to grow. We have to add. We have to improve. We have to generate more light than the day before. And that's the whole idea of ascending in holiness. We never go down. We always go up. The person always has to look at themselves and say, who was I a year ago? Who was I 2 years ago? Who was I 3 years ago? Am I going up in my goodness, in my righteousness, in my observance of mitzvot? In all areas of life, am I rising up or going down? God forbid. As it's often been said, life is like an escalator. No one stands still. Everyone is either going up or going down. And we have to make sure we are going up and never descending, never going down. So that is one of the very important, powerful messages of the story of Hanukkah, to always ask ourselves, how can we do more than we've done in the past? So for example, let's say up until this year, you've lit with candles. Maybe this year, I'm going to light with olive oil rather than with candles. Or maybe in other years when the menorah was lit, you did other things. Now I'm going to sit by the light of the menorah and learn Torah. Or whatever it is, the main objective is to be growing, to be increasing light. Now, another very important message of the holiday of Hanukkah is that Hanukkah is different than Purim, for example. Purim is the next holiday, and Purim was the story of Haman, who wanted to destroy the Jewish people, annihilate us. But Purim, Haman wanted to kill us physically, not spiritually. The Greeks didn't want to kill us physically. They wanted to destroy us spiritually. They wanted to extinguish the light of Judaism. That's why we light candles, represents the soul, represents the light of Torah, that it will burn on and burn brightly. Think about in our generation, we had the Nazis and we had communism. Now, Stalin obviously killed millions and millions of people, but the ideology of communism wasn't out to put Jews in concentration camps and murder them. The objective of communism was to deny God and freedom of religion. And for 70 years, Jews had to hide their Jewish identity in the time of communism in Russia. Think of the Spanish Inquisition, right? The Moranos, right? There were many attempts to not destroy us physically, but spiritually, as opposed to stories like the Holocaust or Haman during Purim, where they wanted to destroy us physically. And that's why the main celebration, there are two miracles that occur in Hanukkah. There's obviously the victory of the Maccabees. A small army defeated a large army, but there was also the miracle of the little cruse of oil that burned for 8 days. But it's interesting. How do we celebrate Hanukkah? By lighting the oil. Now, you would think that the greater of the two miracles, the more important one, was the victory, because the victory allowed us to live and survive as a nation. The cruse of oil was a nice, beautiful miracle. It helped us have oil for 8 days till we got new, fresh, squeezed oil with the seal of the high priest. But if you had to compare the two miracles, you think the victory of the war is the much greater of the two miracles, because that allowed us to be physically alive and survive. But yet the entire emphasis of the celebration is the candles, the light. Why? Because the whole idea is there's two types of freedom. There's freedom from, and then there's freedom for. Step one in the process is to be free from any tyrants, from any oppressors, from those who seek to destroy us. And we have to defeat those who try to destroy us. But now that you have your freedom, like in America, most Jews have freedom. All Jews have freedom. What are you going to do with that freedom? If you don't utilize the freedom to be Jewish, to proudly identify as a Jew, then the freedom didn't serve any purpose. If you're free from the oppression, from the persecution of your enemies, now you could be Jewish fully and proudly. So the victory meant, okay, the Greeks are no longer controlling us. But the kindling of the flame represents the light of Torah, that it's going to burn brightly, that we're going to keep it burning. We're going to kindle those flames. We're going to ignite our Jewish lives, and we're going to pass on, like one candle lights the next one, and the next one, and the next one. We're going to pass on the light of Judaism to millions and millions of Jewish children, so the light can be carried forward on and on and on forever and ever. So survival as a Jewish people has to be for a higher purpose, so that we could live and observe and practice and keep the flame of Judaism burning brightly into the future. And so therefore the main emphasis of the celebration is on not on the victory per se, but on the kindling of the lights of the menorah, which represented the divine temple worship of reigniting the candle of the menorah, the candelabra, which represents Judaism. And that's such a powerful lesson for us today, that, we don't have a temple anymore. We don't have the menorah in the holy temple. And we don't have a Kohen Gadol who's going into the holy temple to light the menorah like it was in those days. But because we have the Torah, and we have the light of the Torah and the light of mitzvot, Judaism continues till today. We've been in exile for thousands of years, but Judaism goes on. But the only way Judaism goes on is with the light of the Torah and the mitzvahs. Without that, there is no future to the Jewish people. And therefore, one of the many customs on the holiday of Hanukkah is to increase in giving. We give children, for example, Hanukkah geld, and we teach them to give charity with some of the money that they receive. There's an emphasis on Torah study, because the war between the Greeks and the Hellenists is still an ongoing battle today. It's the difference between Jews who want to be proudly identified with Torah and Mitzvos and Judaism, and Jews who want to assimilate and lose their Jewish identity and just become secular. And the fight of the Maccabees was to preserve Judaism. And while we don't have a menorah in the temple, we have a menorah in our home. And like I said earlier, where do we light the menorah? In the window, or in the public spaces. It's a holiday that tells us that as Jews, we have to preserve our Jewish identity and practice Torah and Mitzvah so we could be a light unto the world. Other holidays, we observe it in our home. You sit down at the Passover Seder. You don't sit by the window so everyone on the street could see you observing a Passover Seder. We don't go to the window on Rosh Hashanah and blow the shofar by the window so everyone could see us blowing the shofar, right? We do it in our homes, in our synagogues. It's a Jewish thing. We do it for ourselves. When it comes to menorah, where are we commanded to light the menorah? At the window of your house. And always you have public lighting menorah ceremonies, right? We had one, a big one on Sunday. We're having one Thursday night at the Ben Hotel. We're having one Sunday night at the Royal Poinciana Plaza. Everyone's having outdoor big Hanukkah menorah celebrations. Why? Because the whole message of Hanukkah is take the light of Judaism and let it burn bright for the world. And we have an obligation to preserve the light of Torah and Judaism in order to make this world a brighter place, because without Jews and without Judaism, this world will be a much darker place. And therefore, we have a moral obligation and a religious obligation to preserve the light of Torah and Mitzvos and never let it die. And that's the message. As long as we have King Solomon, the book of Proverbs says, Kiner mitzvah v'torah. A candle is a mitzvah and the Torah is the light. That's the light of the Torah. And just like if you have a candle, but you don't strike a match and kindle the wick, the light will not come out of the candle without the fire. You have a cruse of oil with a wick in it and you don't light it, a flame, nothing will shine, nothing will generate heat and warmth. Same thing with our soul. We all have an oil, a cruse of oil within ourselves, which is our soul, but we have to ignite it. What is the match that ignites our soul? Torah and mitzvahs. When we study Torah and we do a good deed, that's the fire, that's the inspiration that ignites our soul and allows it to reach its potential and shine fully and brightly. Now, there's a question that Jillian posed. Why do we assemble the candles right to left, but light left to right? That's a very good question. If we have a Hanukkah menorah, we put in the candles right to left, but we light it left to right. Now, we all know right is always the better side. Whenever we can do a mitzvah with the right, we do it with the right. Right is strength, right is dominance, power. So obviously we're going to light the menorah from right to left because we want to start on the right side. But then the question is, why light it from left to right? Why not put in all the candles, then light it from right to left as well? Why do we light it from left to right? And the answer is so practical, and it may seem like it is a small, insignificant difference, but it's the message it contains. One of the famous dictums of the rabbis is, when you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, do not delay, do not procrastinate. As they say, strike when the iron's hot. Don't say, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next week, I'll do it next, whatever. The Pirkei Avot says, don't say when I have time, I'll study Torah. Maybe you won't have the time. You have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, seize the moment. So, rabbis say, Ein mavirin ala mitzvah. We do not pass over a mitzvah. We do not pass over an opportunity to do a mitzvah. So going back to my little drawing here, here's a menorah with 8 candles. Okay, now, tonight we're going to light the first 3, right? So I don't know how it's coming out on your side, but this is from right to left. So I put in the first candle tonight, then I set up the second candle or oil, then I set up the third one. Now I'm ready to light the menorah. Now, if I go back to the first one to light, you know what I just did? I passed over 2 mitzvahs. I literally took my hand with the flame and I went over 2 mitzvahs to go back here. Never pass over a mitzvah. If you just set up the third candle and your hand is here, this is the closest mitzvah. It's the one that's within the closest reach. Light it right away. And you may say, it's a little movement of the hand from here to there, just a little slight movement. What difference does it make? But it makes a difference because there's a message. There's a mitzvah. The message is, when you have a mitzvah right here, don't even move your hand an inch over here. Grab the first mitzvah you can grab. This is a small illustration of something very powerful, that in life, we come across opportunities to do good deeds. Never pass up an opportunity. They say, don't miss an opportunity, or the window of opportunity. We have all these terms about grabbing opportunities. Well, the most important opportunities to grab are the mitzvahs, the good deeds, because, as you know, you never know if you're going to get that opportunity again. So if Hashem grants you the ability to do something good, always be enthusiastic and always grab and seize the moment and do not delay or procrastinate. So that is, again, the idea of the story of Hanukkah and the whole message of the opinion of Bet Hillel and the direction in which we light the menorah. There's one other thing that perhaps ties into Hanukkah as well. We all know that we use a shamash to kindle all the flames of the menorah. Now, you may say the shamash is very practical. You have to light the candles, so you have a shamash. But why can't you just take one of the 8 candles and light the other candles? For the women on the call, when you light your candles on Friday night, you don't have a shamash candle to light the other Shabbos candles. You just light one of the candles and you light the other one with it. Or if you have more candles, if you light for your children, you light with one candle, you light the other ones. You don't have a designated shamash. Why on Hanukkah is there a designated shamash candle? And the answer is, in the prayer of Hanerot Halalu that we say after we kindle the flames, we say that these flames are holy and we have no permission to use it for anything else except its holy purpose of the mitzvah. So you see, on Friday night, if the candles, if the lights go out in your house on Friday night, and the candles are still burning on the Shabbos table, you could eat and enjoy your food and read the prayers or Torah reading, or books from the light of the candles, because the candles are not holy in the sense that you can't use them for your personal use. Even if you want to just read a magazine or a newspaper from the light of the Shabbos candles, perfectly permissible. But the Hanukkah candles you're not allowed to use for your personal use. And that's why you light a shamash candle, because you're not allowed to even use it to light the other candles. And if you're going to want to use the light of the menorah, you have to use the shamash light, not the other light. Why? Because these are holy lights. Why is this so important that it's holy lights? Because you see, the Greeks, they believed in philosophy. They believed in, science. They believed in the physical Olympics, building your talent, your abilities. They believed in, culture and all of that. What they didn't accept was this idea of spirituality, of holiness, of divine. They said, this Torah that you say God gave you, that has a holy spiritual element, or Shabbat, a day that's holier than the other days of the week, or circumcision, which is a covenant with God in the body, that they couldn't tolerate, they couldn't understand. Or Rosh Chodesh, the day that Jews proclaim as the holy, the first of the month, to declare all the days of the coming holidays, that they couldn't accept. And that's what Hellenism was. It was stripping Judaism from any holiness. And that's why when the Jews came into the temple, they didn't want to use impure oil. They were looking for holy oil sealed with the high priest's seal. What's the difference between holy oil and regular oil? If I showed you two cruises of oil, one is pure, one is impure, could you tell the difference? You take it into a laboratory, you can't tell the difference. Oil is oil. But if you're a Jew, you believe in holiness, you believe in purity, you believe in sanctity, you believe in God. And that's what the Greeks didn't believe in. See, the Greeks said everything has to have, the value of everything is its utilitarian purpose, what it does. So light creates light so you can see things, great. But to say that there's a holy light that doesn't serve any other function, it's just light for the sake of holiness, that they couldn't understand. So the whole idea of celebrating Hanukkah by not using the light of the menorah and say, this is holy light. It's not like other light that you could use to see. This is light just for the mitzvah. And you can't use it for anything practical, anything utilitarian. That's exactly what the Greeks tried to eliminate and obliterate, that faith in things that are holy. The Greeks saw everything as a means to some end, not an end unto itself. Judaism says there are things that are essentially holy and sacred, holy unto themselves, not for any other purpose. And that's, when you look at the story, going back to the story of the Parsha, Joseph symbolizes this, because one of the most powerful things is when Paro calls Joseph out of the pit and says, I want you to interpret my dream. Listen to what Joseph says. Paro says, I heard you're an interpreter of dreams. Can you help me out? Vayan Yosef et Paro lemar. Joseph responds to Paro saying, this is chapter 41, verse 16. Bil adai, that's beyond me. I can't interpret dreams. No. Elokim yanet shlom Paro. It is God who will respond to Paro's dream. You see, I'm nobody. I'm just a vessel. I don't do anything. I don't interpret dreams. I don't have any of that ability. So you got the wrong idea, Paro, if you think I could do anything. It's God who will respond. God will use me to be the vehicle to communicate that message to you. But Paro, don't think it's me. It's Hashem. That's the way a Jew talks. That's the way a Jew thinks. As opposed to a Greek or a Pharaoh, it's all about them. It's all about my wisdom, my power, my strength. That's what Greek, art and statues and Olympics, my strength, my power, my abilities, my skills, my talents. And a Jew is like Joseph. He says, it's all from Hashem. Whatever Hashem gives me the ability to do, that's all I could do. This is at the heart of what it means to be a Jew. And that's in the heart of the story of the Maccabees. You see, if the Maccabees would have asked themselves practically, how are we going to beat these Greeks? They're too powerful. They're too strong. They would have never attempted even in the first place. Just like Israel in 1948, they would have said, how are we going to survive with all these Arab countries? If you don't have faith in God beyond the physical that can help you, you just look at the physical reality. Imagine if a group of native Indians said, you know what, we want to reclaim America. So we're going to get all the Indians in America together and we're going to wage war against the US Army. That's ridiculous. You don't stand a chance. Just like the world would have said to Israel, how are you going to stand up against 5 mighty army nations? But as we say in our prayers, Yisrael b'tach Hashem, Jew trusts in God. Like Joseph, it's from Hashem, he says. And therefore, there's what you could see and measure and understand, and there's that which is beyond what is visible, what is understandable, what is measurable. There's a divine quality and strength. And that's really the story of the Jewish people. The story of the Jewish people is a story of a little group of Maccabees in every generation who stood proud, who stood tall, who fought for their religious rights and freedoms, preserved it, and took the flame of Judaism and kept on lighting it on and on and on. And I'll just conclude, because we only have 2 minutes, with the following thought. The whole idea of candles and flames is all about spirituality, because you see 2 things. First of all, everything in this world follows the laws of gravity. So if I drop my pen, it goes down, right? But a flame is always pulling heavenward. It's always going counter gravity. It's going higher. That's why it represents the soul of man. The body wants to rest, it wants to relax, it wants to eat, it wants to drink, it wants to sleep, it wants to have pleasure. The soul wants to go higher. It's yearning, it's striving, it's jumping, it's dancing. It wants to reach Hashem. It wants to transcend the physical. When you look at a flame, it looks like it wants to go beyond the candle. It wants to leave the candle. Like the soul wants to go beyond the physical. It wants to connect to something transcendental, something holy. But there's another thing. You know, if I take $100 and I decide that I'm going to give everyone on this Zoom call Hanukkah geld, and I give everyone $10 Hanukkah geld. After I give all 10 people on this call $10 each Hanukkah geld, how much do I have? Nothing. Because I gave away $10 to every person. But if I am holding a candle lit and I want to light everyone's candle, and I light everyone's candle, I'm going to give everybody fire. I'm going to light your candle. Everyone has light, and my light is intact. I don't have any less light. Not only don't I have less light, but because I'm in a room with all 10 of you, not on Zoom, we have more light together. And that's the difference between physical and spiritual. Physical is limited. So therefore you give, and the more you give, the less you have. Spiritual things like love. If I show love to 10 people, I don't have less love in my heart. I have more love in my heart. You can't deplete your love. Same thing with knowledge. When you teach someone Torah, you don't lose anything. You gain more knowledge because you shared your knowledge. You shared your Torah. And so Judaism is all about the spiritual. It's about the light. It's about spreading light. And when we share light and spread light, we actually all gain much more. And therefore, our emphasis in life should be focused on the spiritual things, because spiritual things could go, take the light of Judaism. It goes on and on from every generation. It never burns out, but every generation has to keep the flame burning brightly. So that is the message of Hanukkah, message of this week's Torah portion. And we look forward to seeing everyone again at all of our upcoming celebrations. I'm sure you all got the information. We're having a number of great celebrations still left on this holiday. Just to tell you, tomorrow night we're going to light a menorah on Worth Avenue by Daniele's Art Shop at 5 o'clock. On Thursday at the Ben Hotel. We're going to be at Publix on Thursday and Friday. And then on Sunday night, the grand last night of Hanukkah, we're going to light it in the Royal Poinciana Plaza. And on Shabbos, we're having a Friday night dinner at the Shul for Hanukkah. So please come and join us and make sure you have a joyous, happy Hanukkah and light the menorah and think about all the beautiful ideas that Hanukkah shares with us. Have a beautiful day, everyone, and see you soon. Chag Sameach.